Du Conseil, j'invite M. Tarek Mitri, représentant spécial du secrétaire général et chef de la mission d'appui des Nations Unies en Libye, à participer à la séance. Le Conseil de sécurité va maintenant aborder l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. À la présente séance, le Conseil entendra les exposés de M. Tarek Mitri et de son Excellence M. Eugène Richard Gazana, représentant permanent du Rwanda, en sa qualité de président du comité du Conseil de sécurité créé par la résolution 1970 de 2011. Je donne la parole à M. Tarek Mitri.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Les conditions de sécurité en Libye demeurent précaires. Le désarroi et l'inquiétude de la population civile est de plus en plus prononcé. Durant les dernières semaines, des manifestations populaires, tant à Tripoli qu'à Benghazi et à Derna, ont permis aux Libyens de dire haut et fort leur frustration quant au processus politique et leur méfiance à l'égard des brigades. Je continue en anglais. In Tripoli, public anger directed against revolutionary brigades and other armed groups was further fueled by the frequent clashes amongst them. A minor dispute quickly escalated into fierce fighting, which spread in the capital. Prompted by calls, including from Tripoli's local council, for mass protests to demand the withdrawal of armed groups from the capital, demonstrators took to the streets following Friday prayers on November 15th and marched on compounds in the Gargour district held by revolutionary brigades from Misrata. Tragically, 46 people lost their lives and another 516 were injured. Large swaths of the population were mobilized into a campaign of civil disobedience, demanding the evacuation of all armed formations. Bowing to public pressure, Misratan forces have since announced their withdrawal from the city. A number of other brigades have also vacated premises they previously occupied. There were also a wave of protests in Benghazi demanding the eviction of armed brigades and for the reconstitution of the police and army. This public outcry comes against the backdrop of unprecedented levels of insecurity over the past few weeks, with assassinations and abductions of security and state officials appearing to intensify in both Benghazi and Derna. The authorities appointed a military commander for Benghazi, charged with the task of restoring stability to the city and its surrounding areas, followed by a large-scale deployment of Libyan army units. Despite these measures, there remain serious problems to overcome. On November 18th, Benghazi's military commander survived an assassination attempt, seen as a continuation of a sustained targeting of symbols of state authority. Heavy fighting erupted in Benghazi on November 25th between Special Forces units and the Ansar al-Sharia brigades. The official death toll was put at 9, in addition to an undisclosed number of Ansar al-Sharia casualties. Despite a negotiated truce, this remains tenuous, given reports of subsequent killings targeting members of the special forces. despite steps by the government to quickly deploy army units in Tripoli to prevent a security vacuum, the weak capacity of state military and police institutions remains a serious problem. Doubts also remain about how comprehensive or lasting some of these recent moves will be. The events of the past month have again highlighted the need for dialogue with the main armed groups. In the present juncture, we believe it is essential for all parties to engage in dialogue and create the right balance of incentives in order to stimulate a comprehensive process of reintegration and eventual disarmament of armed groups, ultimately moving, therefore, towards the establishment of a state monopoly on the use of armed force. Mr. President, in the context of insecurity prevailing since many months, UNSMIL has asked for enhancing the protection of its premises. An ordinary measure taken by diplomatic missions, international or regional bodies in Libya and elsewhere. The request of the Secretary General relative to a guard unit that could be sent to Tripoli and the response of your esteemed Council was grossly misunderstood by groups in Libya. Some going as far as suspecting the proposed arrangement to be a prelude to an international intervention. The Libyan government and UNSMIL issued clarifications and had to state the obvious. We will have to spare no effort in dispelling misinterpretations and suspicions, no matter how unjustified they may seem, and reaffirming the role of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, committed to the full respect of its national sovereignty. Mr. President, the situation of the 8,000 conflict-related detainees remains a source of concern. The majority of those continue to be held by armed brigades, awaiting judicial process. Prolonged detention and interrogation in the absence of effective state control or oversight has created an environment conducive to torture and other forms of ill treatment. UNSMIL has found hard evidence of torture, with 27 deaths in custody recorded since the end of the conflict, 11 of which took place this year. Our report on torture has received noteworthy attention in Libya, and the government welcomed its recommendations. We do take heart from the improvement in the conditions of detention facilities that are placed under the authority of newly trained officers of the judicial police. In this regard, UNSMIL will continue its monitoring work and its efforts to assist the judicial police in developing its capacity to manage all detention centers in line with international human rights standards. I am pleased to report that a new law on transitional justice was promulgated last week by the General National Congress. The law includes provisions on truth-seeking, reparations for victims, and requiring that detainees be released or handed over to the judiciary within 90 days of this promulgation. UNSMIL had provided extensive comments based on best practices, and some of them were duly taken into account. In a related context, I welcome the recent release of 4 senior leaders of the Warfalla tribe held for more than 1 year in the city of Al-Zawiya without charge or trial. Similar initiatives will undoubtedly contribute to the process towards establishing the rule of law and achieving national reconciliation. Mr. President, since my briefing to this Council on the 4th of November with respect to the control of man-portable surface-to-air missiles, MANPADS, and uranium fissile material, otherwise known as yellow cake, UNSMIL has received preliminary information but requested the Libyan authorities to share more documentation on MANPADS subject to its control. In addition, the mission hopes to see greater cooperation with international partners on issues of arms proliferation. With respect to yellow cake, we have received information indicating that 6,400 barrels are stored in a non-functional former military facility close to Sabha in the south. They are under the control of a Libyan army battalion. With UNSMIL support, an inspection team from the International Atomic Energy Agency will visit this month to verify existing stockpiles and conditions of storage. Further to the verified destruction in April-May this year of almost 9 metric tons of mustard gas, an inspection team from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is expected to visit later this month to observe and verify the destruction of chemical weapons in line with Libya's obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. The Prime Minister established an interministerial committee tasked with developing a national arms and ammunition management strategy, and UNSMIL will be closely assisting in this regard. Mr. President, progress towards the election of a 60 members Constitution Drafting Assembly remains steady, with the nominations process having closed on November 7th, with a total of 700 registered candidates, including 74 women who will contest the 6 seats reserved for women. A vetting process with a right to appeal is now underway. The preliminary candidate lists were published on December 7th. With the support of UNSMIL, a joint action plan has been developed by a newly established National Women's Network to empower women and strengthen their participation in the political process, particularly in the upcoming elections. Although the first phase of voter registration commenced on December 1st, the High National Elections Committee remains cautious about committing itself to a firm date for polling. This is partly a result of the Amazigh community's boycott of nominations. Notwithstanding the fact that 6 seats have been reserved for cultural and ethnic minority groups, disagreements over constitutional guarantees on minority rights waits for an acceptable compromise solution. In view of the continued absence of political agreement over the tenure of the General National Congress, I convened in November a consultative meeting of 40 leaders of major political forces, women, and other independent personalities to explore options for the management of the democratic transition. As with the first consultation I convened a month earlier, the exchanges were markedly frank, but also reflected a shared desire among all participants to reach an agreement on the way forward, an agreement grounded in a commitment to a democratic process and conscious of the need to prevent a political vacuum at all costs. Mr. President, in my previous briefings to this Council, I underlined the important role an inclusive national dialogue can play in diffusing excessive political polarization and producing a shared vision for the future, both the immediate future and a longer-term one. A number of national dialogue initiatives have been announced over the past few months, and UNSMIL continues to underscore the need for a single process that enjoys acceptance of all parties. La MANUL continue à contribuer à la préparation du dialogue national. En donnant conseil et en apportant une assistance technique, ce travail a connu un certain progrès. En novembre dernier, nous avons organisé une session de formation au dialogue et de discussion entre les représentants des différentes tendances politiques. Je suis encouragé par l'intérêt exprimé par nos interlocuteurs libyens, ainsi que par leur appréciation du travail de la MANUL dans ce domaine. Nous avons été appelés à être engagés de plein pied dans cet effort. Et je vous assure que nous le ferons. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.